If you're new to the Vinyl Factory podcast, basically our normal episodes are full of conversations and music and poetry and chat. And so this is a big, long, extended, deep dive episode we call The Factory Floor Cuts. And it's a deep dive because Natalie is doing a PhD and this is a very exciting conversation with David Hayley.
David Hayley is an artist and ecologist who I got to know through a project I was working on in Tadcaster at a community centre called The Barn. And this project that's called Now Then, it's Arts Council funded, and David was employed as an ecological lead. And actually the way this conversation came about was that part of his job was to have one-on-one conversations with absolutely everyone who was broadly involved in the Now Then project and talk to them about their experience of ecology and the environment and environmental issues. And we touch a little bit about what David's experience of that was. But also one of my favourite things about doing this podcast is it gives us the opportunity to record and give due prominence to conversations that we will be having anyway. So I get this email of David saying, would you like to book in one of the one-on-one conversations? And I go, yes, if I can record it, and also I get to flip the old microphone and turn the spotlight onto you, and I get to ask you lots of questions about your practice, because I hadn't spent too much time with David, but I got the sense that we had a lot in common. And as you say, with the PhD being in theatre and environmental justice and my own creative practice working here in East Leeds, we're now at a point where I have to go and, well, I don't have to, but I would like to. It's a good idea if I go and talk to other people who are doing similar kinds of work and see if there's, they're running the challenges and the tribulations and the joys that they're also coming up, what the big themes that are affecting their work. And amazingly, I'm finding there's lots of similar stuff that's popping up. So I think it makes for some good chat, hopefully.
I was really struck by the evolution of his art form from clowning and working in lots of different places and bringing joy, and this 80s churn of socialist lefty theatre. But then in the 90s he goes, and then I heard about this thing called climate change, and nobody had ever mentioned this before, and suddenly it becomes linked to the arts. And now I think seeing a play about climate change is pretty common. There's good ones, there's bad ones. You can go see a play about climate change. But what I really enjoy, and this is the sort of academic nerd in us, is the nature of the language of what does environment mean and what does place mean. But also talking about his own practice, what would this would want, which is a bit of a tongue twister. What would this would want is one of the main projects that David has been working on recently, and we touch upon it where and again this links a lot to the conversation that I've recently had with Scott Burrell, where we're talking about the principles of permaculture and decentering the human and starting to put nature and the environment now I'm very self-conscious about what language I'm using. Putting that, giving it a voice and really centering that rather than thinking that humans have got all the answers. We really don't. We're the problem. We need to get out the way and start paying attention to what nature is telling us. So he was working on a project in a wood in North Yorkshire, and his initial question was, what would the wood want? Which I found completely charming. But going back to what you were saying about his career, he graduates from art school in the late 70s, and what I find really exciting is when something I've been researching and writing about, which was the birth of the community arts movement, and trying to put myself on in some historical context, and then going, here's a person who was there, who was my history is your lived experience. And then also when he got to the 90s and learned about
climate change. I think that that's very similar to my dad's experience as well. And it was my dad who first introduced me to this idea when I was very young. So like probably 1996, 1997, when I'm 6 and 7 years old, that going like I was bought the Little Green Book, which was, all about climate change. And it then very early on, I had this feeling of like, well, I'm so glad everyone knows about this now and we could all just sort it out.
Yeah.
Like this feeling. I mean, when you're 6 and 7, you can be forgiven for thinking the grown-ups are going to fix it because that's maybe your but I've got to play my part, and I ran around my house turning the light switches off. But yeah, then it was like, this part of your history is kind of really crosses over with my own. And I think that kind of social history side of things comes across.
And he also is deeply inspired by Welfare State and goes on to work with them, I think. And Welfare State was a big inspiration to Buff Wally, who is a writer and musician that we have also interviewed. So you should check out that episode if you want to see how Welfare State have spread across so many different artists and inspired them.
Anywho, I think that's enough chat, don't you think, Henry? Should we let the people listen to the chat?
Yeah, enough chat from us.
More
Chat from you and David.
Here's me and David having a chat.
Great. Thanks, David.
Okay.
So why don't we start with you telling us about how you became David Hayley, the artist, ecologist, researcher, publisher, all those things that you are.
Well,
Where did it all begin?
I didn't choose a career in art. It kind of chose me. So when I was 4 years old, I filled two sketchbooks over one weekend with drawings. And my parents said, David, you're an artist. Now, I know that sounds really corny, but that's actually really true. I was good at drawing and painting and stuff, won a few prizes and things. But nobody actually asked me what it was I'd originally drawn. And I'd originally filled the two sketchbooks with drawings of my dad, who was in the Free French Navy during the war. And I didn't actually want to be an artist. I wanted to be a sailor. But it was also, I'm dyslexic. So I found that explaining things that I didn't know the word for, I would draw them. So
Mm.
drawing became a way of communication. And then that led to, as I say, going through school. I did a lot of early life drawing and Saturday morning classes at Camberwell School of Art. Ended up going to Camberwell School of Art. Did my undergraduate there. Despite being very keen and very conscientious, produced an awful lot of work. I became very, very dissatisfied with the art world. I mean, I hated private views and all of that stuff. Um, so I didn't feel as if I fitted in. And I was far more interested in politics. And in fact, I was hauled up for un-Camberwellian activities. And the head of painting, it was a bit like painting When Did You Last See Your Father? He had this enormous desk in this big studio office. And he said, David, you paint these really hedonistic works that you do. I did a lot of colour field, abstract expressionist stuff. It's very hedonistic. And he said, there've never been any famous painters who've been political. And I just said, well, Leigh,
Wow.
Courbet, Manet, Picasso. And then the head of my ear sort of grabbed me and said, don't be a smart ass. So,
What year are we talking about here?
well, I graduated in 74.
How the
And I
world
was,
was about to change.
yeah. Well, I'd sort of grown up through the 60s, you see. And I was far more interested in London squatters movement and those sort of things and anti-war demonstrations and things like that. Um, yeah, so I wasn't interested in the art world as
Yeah.
as such. Um, but that's where I was also sort of stuck. So I then found a place called Battersea Community Arts Centre. That literally, I think I was the first um, centre. Not, no, I wasn't a manager by any means. I was the first centre assistant to be employed. But at the same time, in fact, one of my school teachers also offered me work, a marketing and advertising studio, in which I had absolutely no experience whatsoever. But I thought, oh, I could make a living doing that.
I often think in the moment when you're living it, you don't realize until the moments become history that you go, ah, that was a time in history that was a thing called the community arts movement, where you are one of many groups, many young men who are well, not was mostly, and also women
And
going
women.
to art school, to going into the arts and finding it
Yeah,
dissatisfactory and going, we don't belong in
totally.
this world. We want to be out where the politics is, where the people are, in squatted buildings. We want to be rebuilding institutions and making art where the people are.
Exactly. One of the brilliant things about Battersea Community Arts Centre, as it was that there were six theatre companies based there at the time, as well as visual artists and musicians. It was a real melting pot, absolutely brilliant place to be.
Mm.
Um, and I, I was seduced by the theatre side of things, and in particular one clown
We'll have
company
that
called
effect on people, us theatre
Sol-
lot.
absolutely Selector Balloon Band. So I was also friendly with the technical director there as well. Who taught me theatre lighting. So that was a kind of way in. So I left the advertising studio, got a job with the clown company, and ended up running it for my sins. Actually, the only time I actually performed, and I'm going to name drop here, was at Nebworth Park for the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger wanted clowns in between the different acts, 25 other clowns to perform and entertain the crowds during, at that time there was only the one stage, and it actually was the first time that he used the Big Lips stage. So changing bands took, about half an hour or so. So we entertained the crowds while that was happening. And I was in a gorilla costume because I wasn't a performer as such, running around with like a large sort of surreal hammer for some reason. I've no idea why. But it was a really, really hot day. I mean, really hot. And of course, being in a gorilla costume, um, I fainted backstage.
Oh no.
Um, Now wait for it. So I wake up, somebody's taking off my head mask. And it was Paul McCartney.
No, give
But the
over.
next thing is there's Linda McCartney saying to him, "Don't touch him, you don't know where he's been." So he just wished me well and
No
walked away.
way. Thought you were gonna say, don't touch him. He'll think that he's hallucinating. You're Paul McCartney.
No, 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 it was only
Poor man
fainting.
is not gonna feel better if he thinks, oh, look, there's one of the Beatles.
It just happens to be there. So we spent a lot of time doing community-based work in the streets of London, Covent Garden early days before they regenerated the market, and all of that.
I guess it's too big a question to say how does it compare to today, but do you have a sense that that this is political? Does it feel like a political act to be a clown company going out and doing work
Well, it
in a
was then,
community street or whatever?
yeah, because um, in London it was very much sponsored by Greater London Arts, which was part of GLC. Which of course Maggie Thatcher brought to an end very swiftly when
Mm.
she came to power. Um, but Augusto Boal did a wonderful piece in the Greater London Council buildings that were then empty that critiqued Thatcher. Superb piece of work, really superb.
Where does ecology and environmentalism and all that side of things start coming in?
Well, fast forward, the clown company collapsed because our Mercedes van broke down, and I then bumped into a company called Welfare State International, who were doing the first London International um, Festival of Theatre, Lift.
Mm.
And they did a piece of work called Raising the Titanic in Limehouse Basin. And I was taken on board to produce block prints for banners and things for the quayside with my Bengali youths. Um, I saw the show, I think it was 5 times in 3 weeks, and it changed my life. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. I took all my friends, I took my mother, I took anybody and everybody that I knew. 2 years later, I went
Oh,
to
hang on,
one of,
you're gonna have to tell me more about this. How
oh,
did it change your life? What was it about this artwork that really spoke to you?
okay. So I'd been exposed to quite a lot of fringe theatre and street theatre, which at that time was like the rock and roll of the day. It was really cool. I mean, especially, like hanging out in Amsterdam and stuff. To be honest, it was exciting stuff. And, we thought we were sort of politically on the edge and doing, the right thing and all of that. Because in my company, they were real clowns. It wasn't like other companies who simply sort of got some kids, put on costumes and sort of laughed. These were like really skilled performers that I was working
Mm,
with. Seeing the work of Welfare State International, this was like a whole other level. Um,
right.
from a production point of view, I'd never seen anything quite like it. It was simply amazing. The spectacle of it was phenomenal. Um, and not just things like the pyrotechnics and that at the end. It was the spectacle of the large scale puppets and large scale mechanical objects. I mean, they had cranes and things moving containers that contained whole scenes along a quayside. The scale was just phenomenal.
Wow.
And the subject matter was using the Titanic as a metaphor for basically neoliberal society and how it was collapsing. There we go. Um, so,
Oh
um,
well, they've been proved wrong, haven't they?
well, we're still trying.
Just one more piece of artwork that proves that neo-capitalism isn't a good idea. Come on, let's keep going. Maybe the next one will work. No, like
Yeah,
that's my head. That's where it starts, is like Welfare State International, where everyone's going, come on, yes, this amazing, powerful piece of work. And now it's like, oh God, like 50 years later, we're still trying. Still.
yes,
Anyway, go
unfortunately, the
on.
neo-capitalists are a lot more powerful than we are, but it doesn't stop us.
Oh no, I
Um,
don't
so, um,
keep
2 years
going.
later, I did a summer workshop with Welfare State International. Um, and met my wife. She moved down to London eventually. We then had a daughter. We then had really bad series of break-ins and things in London, and I moved my daughter and my wife back up to Ulverston, which is the home of Welfare State International at that time. And I managed to get a job with them, which was kind of a
Hooray.
mix because it was like the best company and things in the world that I wanted to work for. But I became like company manager. So it was probably the worst job to be doing because it wasn't being an artist. In 1992, one of our directors, a guy named Liam Hughes, came to one of the board meetings. I was company secretary as well. He told us about a summit that was taking place in Rio de Janeiro called the Earth Summit. And he told us about the thing that they announced there called climate change. Nobody had heard of it before. It was the first time it was made public. and you could send off for a book, which I did, on the Earth Summit, and in it it told you about something called Agenda 21, which was how we're going to solve it. But it was kind of okay. It was like, we were thinking about 300 to 500 years timescale that it would really start to sort of come into place. Nevertheless, my then 4-year-old daughter, I was very concerned about, and her future. And I realized that the most important thing in the world that I could do was address this thing called climate change. So I learned about something called ecology a bit, took some books out and started to swat up on it. And then I bumped into a wonderful lady named Elsa Levasseur, who just created a master's course at Manchester Metropolitan University called Art as Environment. She was a landscape architect from South Africa, but had lived in Los Angeles for many years. And as part of the course, she told us about all these amazing people in the United States who were doing something called ecological art, which is what I was kind of wanting to do.
Mm.
Because the thing also about this Earth Summit and Agenda 21 is that they had 3 columns. Try and do this properly. We were going to solve climate. They were going to solve climate change with society, economics, and environment. And I started to think about this, and they kind of got the metaphor for architecture of these columns a bit kind of wrong because they missed the lintel that goes across the top, which is culture. And I thought, well, that's
Right.
my way in as an artist because everything was about economists, politicians, and scientists.
Hmm.
But actually, climate change is a cultural issue,
Yeah.
and it's the culture that connects all the stuff. As I was finishing the course and starting my PhD, I was invited to be the project manager for 2 artists that I'd studied called Helen Mae Harrison and Newton Harrison, who were doing a project for Art Trans Pennine 98. So, I mean, just serendipity. I then ended up doing 2 years sort of residential, artist in residence at the Institute for Terrestrial Ecology, which is now the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology based at Lancaster University. But at that time, it was based in a place called Grange over Sands, in what had been a stately home. So it was amazing. It was very, very British. It had these Nissen huts that went out from the stately home, and they could have invented the Spitfire there. It was that
Mm.
sort of feel to it. But I learnt a lot and questioned a lot about the science and ecology that was going on there, and got involved in all sorts of different things. That was basically how I got into ecological art.
And so then the way our paths have crossed is through a program called the Now Then program, which I'm involved in as a podcaster in Tagcaster. And you have a role. This program goes across Tadcaster and Selby and one other place. Yeah.
Sherburn in Elmet.
So these three towns have had a 2-year program where there's all sorts of arts and cultural activity going on in the community. And you've been brought on board as a ecological artistic. What's your job title again?
It's ecological responsibility lead. So there are 2 lead persons in this in Now Then. There's myself doing ecological responsibility, and a lovely woman named Renisa who is doing equity, diversity, and inclusion. And one of the things that we agreed from the very early stages is the connection between the two. Um, However, because Now Then is funded specifically from the Arts Council, and the Arts Council has investment priorities that are separate. Um,
Mm.
and so we have to report separately, and the evaluations that we do are sort of separate. But if you like, we're questioning that as we go as well. Um, because
Huh.
in my opinion, there is no separation between ecological responsibility, equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's all part of the
Yeah.
same spectrum.
I mean, to someone who doesn't think about these things all the time, it can sound like, well, you've got your plants on one side and your humans on the other, and only certain types of human and only certain types of plant. Do you know what I mean? And when you're going, that's the exact opposite of what we want people to do, is to firstly stop centering humans and seeing us separate from an ecosystem, and also seeing, oh, there's just so much in which social justice is overlapping, and these different kinds of social justice are interconnected. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that we can't have one without the other. They're in complete relationship with each other. um, well, I'm sure you'll do some great feedback for the Arts Council and make an excellent argument for why they should be connected.
It sounds like you're doing my job, actually. That's the idea. I mean, the title, in fact, of ecological responsibility started with the Arts Council's investment principle of environmental responsibility. And in fact, when I applied to do this, I said, no, I don't want to do environmental responsibility. I want to do ecological responsiveness. And it was quite interesting at the early stages. We had a mini conference around evaluation and things of that sort. And all the partners and the stakeholders and people were given a whole set of questions about environmental stuff and the EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion stuff. Um, and while um, nearly everybody in their response got the difference between responsibility and responsiveness, nobody could get the difference between ecology and environment. And in fact, in a
Mm.
lot of my conversations, people still use an interchange even in the same sentence. Ecology, environment, sustainable, green. The language has become mush.
Yeah, definitely.
I hung out for ecological, heading in on
I'll tell you what
responsibility.
I think of, what the images bring to my mind, and you can tell me whether it's anything like the images that are in your mind with these two phrases. With environment, I I think of it as like a management thing. I think it's been over. I think of policy when I think of environment these days, of the way it's been used. And responsibility, I think of it's our responsibility to manage this situation.
Yep,
So once again, it's then just centering the human experience and thinking, how can we control and sort of uh, take sensible steps to manage our way out of this burning rock that we're all sat on. Whereas the other
yep,
one, when I think of ecology, I think of an ecosystem, and I think of things being cyclical, and we're part of that ecosystem, and it's messy and convoluted. And I think of jellyfish and moss and algae, and humans being organisms that are just part of this rock that's floating through space. And
yep,
responsiveness is like observing what is happening and responding because we're part of this same moving, growing beast.
yep.
How am I
Yeah,
doing so far?
absolutely spot on. As I said, you could do me, you could do
Yeah.
my job. No, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. We need to move on from environmental responsibility. And that's like 10 years ago, at least. And I wanted, and I've said to everybody, probably said to you when we first met, the one thing I didn't want anybody to feel was guilt, which the
And that's where it comes from,
responsibility
isn't
is
it? I'm not doing enough because it's my responsibility.
absolutely,
We're all part of this problem and it's happening to us and we are happening and it's, we're all being impacted and affected
yeah,
and affected. Like both things are happening. So
yeah,
yeah, respond, don't
yeah.
manage.
That's actually because it's a way of empowering people to actually want to be engaged rather than feeling guilty for having done something wrong when they didn't recycle it in the right bin. And the whole neuroses that starts to build around that. And it's also, I mean, in terms of the research that I've done, things don't seem to be taken seriously in society unless it's turned into an industry. So the whole
Yeah,
recycling issue and repurposing and all of that.
it's so true. Till the grown-ups in the room with the suit on tell us that well, capitalism has said that this thing is real. In fact, I was listening to an interview with an American climate scientist the other day,
Mhm.
and they were talking about all sorts of different things, but particularly like politically what's going on in America and how difficult it is to be a climate scientist. And she has a climate denier of a father. And I thought, oh my gosh, how can how do you have that conversation over Christmas dinner? And she said, "Do you know what? Convinced my dad that
Kidding.
climate change was real. Says it wasn't me doing, dedicating my whole life to it and all the things I've published and all the conferences I've been to and all the work I've done. No, it was that the insurance companies started insuring against various climate risk. And so he went,
Yeah,
well, if it's a perfect example of what you're saying, if there's an industry there, if the people's whose job it is to assess risk or they'll lose
yep,
money, they wouldn't do it if it wasn't important. And that was the
exactly.
thing that then started to make him recognize that it was real.
In the what early 2000s, Manchester Metropolitan University was very much involved with Manchester City Council, and a wonderful woman named Lucy Danger who set up the first recycling unit in Manchester, if not in the north of England, which is still going. I think it's called Emerge. It was interesting to see the shift in the way that councils and industry were then working, so that when they started to realize that you could make money out of recycling, as opposed to just doing it for the good of the planet and everything on it, they then got involved in it. But then you realize that actually to recycle plastic, you have to make more plastic. And this is where something called the circular economy starts to get corrupted. So
Right.
it becomes a vicious circle rather than a closed circle of a system.
It's still based on growth,
And exactly. And that's the problem. Yeah.
which is yet another reason why personal guilt is such a delusion, because as soon as you get into any kind of complex understanding of each individual action, you realize that most of it's nonsense anyway. And
Yeah.
sure, there's harmful stuff and less harmful stuff, but
Yeah.
no matter what angle you're looking at something, you could argue from a different perspective you know, that there's a certain level of negative impact, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So
these are difficult times. But to get back to working with the community, I do also understand, and yeah, I think it like props to you for hanging on to ecological responsiveness and trying to make that argument. And I think it's a really strong argument to make. I think a lot of the time when I'm working with a community and there's an environmental element, just go use whatever language you want. It doesn't matter.
yes and no. I mean, again, it's like, our language has changed in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We certainly wouldn't use language that was being used 10 years ago even.
Sure. Yeah.
And yet when it comes to ecological issues, we can
Yeah.
lose whatever we want because, again, as you said at the beginning, it's still seen as something that's separate, something that's
Mm,
outside your front door, someone else's problem, something that's too
yeah.
big. It's all of those, and of course, nobody's got time for it
Yeah.
because we've all been distracted by other things.
And
Um,
algae can't request different pronouns.
and they don't vote.
Oh, yeah. Algae doesn't vote. That's a problem. Votes
The
for
thing, yeah.
algae.
Well, somebody
Are
asked me
you coming
yesterday,
to the end
what's,
of it as well? The now then.
I mean, one of the
Yeah.
things,
So what are your thoughts so far? What have
um,
you learned?
well, in delivery, first of all, trying to hold um, collective meetings of people. Um, Nobody's got the time because we're all too busy.
Yeah.
Um, that's the first thing. In talking to people individually and having conversations, as we're doing now, it's been absolutely brilliant and very revealing, both for me and from what other people have said to me.
Hmm.
Um, and I've actually seen a real shift in consciousness, in people's understanding. Um,
Nice.
I've seen people actually let go of guilt as part of the
Mm,
process of just talking it out.
yeah.
Um, and I know it sounds sort of a bit bonkers, but actually, at times, me giving permission to stop feeling guilty,
Have you
okay,
been doing ecological therapy?
well,
Community workers.
that's right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, until now I hadn't thought of it that way around, but yes, there you go. It's almost like that. Um, so yeah, just stop beating ourselves up and actually see it as part of, living and life and the way that we live and the processes and the dynamics that we live with. And how
Yeah.
might we make it? We're not going to solve it overnight by any stretch of the imagination, um, but we can make the changes that are taking place perhaps a little more bearable.
And so what for assuming that you're talking to some people who will have a range of experience and a relationship to climate change and the environment. Um, and you've got some that care deeply and are actively involved in trying to do their best and all sorts, and then some that don't think about it very much and uh, go, what, another thing that I have to do? And you'll probably have all sorts of people in the middle. What shifts of consciousness did you see, or what was, do you see most people as being like people care, but they just don't feel empowered to do anything? Is that
Yes.
generally where most people are
Generally,
coming
that,
from?
that's the issue. But also some people actually then starting being given permission to question different things, to question different modes of working, um, to actually um, be empowered, be more confident in doing different forms of their work that don't necessarily all revolve around social media and digital ways of doing and thinking. Um, that actually has stood out really, really strongly in terms of the people I've talked to. Um,
Okay.
because again, there's kind of lots of myths about you can't print 500 leaflets because it's going to waste paper. It's going to chop down trees, and the ink's going to poison the planet. And well, that's actually compared with the use of social media. That's a complete reverse. And
Mm,
certainly, when you come into using things like AI and anything like that, the amount of water consumption
yeah.
that is used in social media generally and AI in particular is probably one of the biggest threats to planetary life, and I don't
Mm.
exaggerate. Whereas 500 leaflets actually going through people's doors for people that maybe aren't as digital savvy as everybody else,
Yeah.
they can actually read it, put it in their pocket, walk
Hmm.
away with it. It's completely
Yeah.
negligible.
Well, this is kind of what I mean about how do you risk assess every action? Because even if you had an inverted commas expert who was going to create, okay, not risk assess, but let's carbon report your action. You've got a choice between a series of social media posts or printing 500 papers. You could have two experts that analyze that data and come to two different conclusions as to which is more impactful. And one could look at from a carbon perspective and come up with a figure. Someone could come look at it from you know, um, a more ecological perspective and come up with a different kind of figure. So these things are really difficult. Um, and I think that's also another challenge I have, linking it to back to being environmental responsibility and also coming in like how I'm often received if people hear that I'm doing environmental work. They assume that you're firstly perfect. Secondly, they assume put themselves into a position of guilt, and I'm there to judge them.
Yeah,
And thirdly, that I know anything, like know anything. And you're like, and it's absolutely one of those things of like, no, the more I learn, the more I know we don't really know what the answers are. Like
sure.
we are not managing this out of because there
No.
there really isn't any answers.
Yeah, and there isn't a happy ending.
Yeah.
Again, one of the issues that comes across is you have to keep it simple, you have to keep it short, and you have to have a happy ending. We don't want to scare the children. I had a few heated discussions about the fact that actually the children know it's the parents and the older generation who have a problem. I
And
said the
also
kids have
we
got a
had no
problem. I mean,
problem with
just the
scaring that we had no problem with scaring children like 10 years ago and in the past. And
yeah.
they're fine. The kids know.
It's no, I mean, you've only got to watch the news every day, and it's there, and
Mm.
the kids get it. But the grown-ups have been programmed and educated in such a way um, to actually dispel it from their daily
Yeah.
lives. And so, you get um, the different political groups who then play very much on cost of living problems, which I don't dismiss at all, but that's again related to the whole issue. Um, and again, it's sidelined as a way of knowing how to live in the world.
Mm.
And again, if I have one criticism of the Arts Council's environmental responsibility policy is that it is still very much based on governmental priorities regarding carbon. And it does, until recently, I mean, very recently, it hasn't really addressed at all species extinction, which actually, if you just stop and think for one moment, yes, the climate emergency is one of the biggest threats to species extinction, but species extinction itself is a much greater threat to our existence. And yet
Yeah.
the government, I mean, both parties won't really address that. They can turn climate into carbon, and that becomes an industrial issue
Hmm.
and an economics issue. But as you say, plants and species and different living organisms don't vote. They don't have, and they are not the same form of economic industrial development. What does art do? What are artists meant to do? And the answer that I come up with because I've been asked that a few times, uh,
Mm.
is artists are allowed to, not all of them do it, but they're allowed to think differently. Again, I generalize here. Most scientists are governed by the research programs that are government-led and industry-led. Very few scientists are allowed to actually think for themselves outside of their research programs. Again, not all artists by any means, sadly,
Mm.
but artists are still in a position where they can think differently. Well, that's why the last government tried to get rid of the arts completely, because it's too dangerous. It challenges authority. And it's
Hmm.
why Maggie Thatcher tried to get rid of Welfare State International.
Yeah.
She managed to move 1984 out of England, and a few other companies went bust at the same time.
Mm.
Um, so yes, I mean, art is still politically dangerous, or can be.
Yeah, I think the more that we are cornered, well, it shows how much power we can have the more that we're clamping down on protest and performers and legitimate being terrified by what people are saying or how they are responding to
Yes.
the crises that we're facing. It shows the power of it.
And it goes straight across to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Going back to sort of working in Tadcaster or specifically in place, because as I started my PhD, I was centered in a place and my work, it was the beginning of lockdown. So that's sort of why I was working in my local area because we weren't allowed to go anywhere else. But as I've gone through this sort of now in my fourth or fifth year, very slow process, the importance of place and like micro places. So a forest garden, an allotment, a green, and they happen to be outdoor places, and doing work with people that live around that place and the work is in response to that place and in response to people's relationship with that place. And so this has become a really big theme that I'm delving into. And so I was really interested when you sent me one of the projects that you've worked on recently. Is it the Martin Wood?
Ah, yeah.
What can you
So,
tell
yeah.
me about this project?
I've known and worked with Chrysalis Arts Development over 20 odd years now, 25 years, I think it is. But one of the four artists who was commissioned to respond to the idea of mapping Martin Wood, which is a very small wood near Martin cum Grafton in North Yorkshire.
Hmm.
Um, and the idea of mapping itself interests me.
Yeah,
Um,
because again, we get into a place of managing and, men with ships and guns going off to draw lines in lands that, lines that don't even exist. And we get back to boys and their toys again. That's one kind of map. And then another kind of map is like, walking barefoot through a forest and finding your way. And um, you're also mapping it by being there and, experiencing it.
totally, totally. So,
One is managing and one is responsiveness.
well, every map tells a story. And no map is the terrain that it depicts. And I'm interested in my research in recent years in something called storying as a research method um, and as an artistic practice. So, storying is not just storytelling, it's the making and telling of stories. It's a lot about listening to people, for one, listening to yourself as another, and perhaps even listening to a place. I get a bit concerned sometimes about placemaking. Again, the term came out of sort of regeneration public art practice in the mid 90s, and I still find it a little bit suspect, so I have to be careful.
Yeah.
And it was very popular among architects. There
Mm.
was a Norwegian guy named Norberg Schultz, who was a phenomenological architect who wrote Phenomenological Architecture, one book, and another was Genius Loci. So very much about the power of place. But actually, that's another book title, The Power of Place, which was about the Chicago School of Art's interventions in the late 80s into community forms of art that also included some, at that time, environmental arts. It's again how you use the word place and
Yeah,
placing.
these and of course you've got place and then space. So that there are when does a it is
And
unlegitimizing of that a place isn't a place until we've paid someone to do a thing in this place, or until we've urbanized it or gentrified it. Now it's a place. We've made it a place.
exactly. So in general, you see, I'm then more interested in ecology and the space
Mm.
between things, connects things. As Gregory Bateson once said, the pattern that connects. And therefore, space becomes a more dynamic way of looking at things. It doesn't necessarily look at permanence of, or the myth of permanence of place. Not to dispel it, because there are places that are special, and that's another set of things. But anyway, we can play with words all the
Yeah.
time. Back to Martin Wood. I was interested in the idea of mapping and storying as a form of mapping. Back when I was working with the Harrisons, doing research with the Institute for Terrestrial Ecology, they just come in with a whole new set of data gathering systems called GIS, Geographic Information Systems. So GIS came in and the whole language changed for people in the environmental sciences. They started thinking and talking about layers. But as I said, artists can think differently, and I question that actually the world is not made up of layers. That's just a system that we use to notate it. So it becomes a different kind of story. So I was watching a webinar about nature-based solutions, and which interests me. And at the end of that, there was a presentation with a very nice guy from the North and East Yorkshire Ecological Data Centre, who was doing a program of research with Oxford University um, around the gathering of, I think it was 12 or more different data sets to be able to see the value of conservation and restoration and even maybe regeneration of places in the UK. Which starts to then beg questions about the values and the worth of place. And I then applied those ideas to this little wood in North Yorkshire. Um, and putting the program, when the program was being put together, there were people talking about communities, people talking about species and ecology and the science and all sorts of different things that Martin Wood had to offer, and the programs of work that were, that were going to be done, and the evaluation systems that were going to be used. And the question occurred to me as to what's in it for the wood. And so I asked the ecologist at this data center, what's in it for the wood? And he paused for a while, and he said, well, actually, the wood's completely unremarkable.
Oh.
And the people that were
Oh.
there, their faces dropped because, their sort of precious wood was like unremarkable. And
Oh.
I thought for a bit, and I said, well, actually, this is what's so good. I said, it's not a site of scientific importance. It's not an area of outstanding natural beauty.
Yeah.
It's not a celebrity place. It's just an unremarkable wood.
I mean, it's writing
The
itself
unremarkable wood.
already, isn't it? What's so good about my wood, my little unremarkable wood?
But the unremarkable wood, if it became commonplace, how good would that be?
Mm,
So then give the wood agency and ask the
yeah.
wood, what would you want to do if you had your own way? And then the research that I've been doing in North Yorkshire, is that there's actually a lot of new, very small, very unremarkable community woods that are being formed. And I mean, the University of Leeds has actually created its own little wood for a research project. Other places are doing all sorts of different things. There's an amazing farm that's been converted into the Forest of Flowers, which has the highest density of butterflies anywhere in the UK.
What? That sounds
And all,
amazing. Where's that?
that's also in North Yorkshire. It's only about 5 miles away from Martin Wood.
And yeah, so were you
So that
working with people on each of the stories, or um was this you doing it on your own, or what's the artistic process been like?
it's called talking to people and then trying to listen and then um, working with their ideas, playing them backwards and forwards to them, with them, um, and then turning them sometimes into poetic texts, sometimes into visualizations, sometimes a mix of the two, um, and kind of seeing where it goes. As an artist, I try not to tie myself down to any one art form. Um, So I let the program of work that I'm working on, or the project that I'm working on, dictate how the art forms are, in my opinion, then needed, um, and how they emerge. Um,
Mm.
so again, working with a fabulous woman named Caitlin Badger at Chrysalis Arts. I mean, she did like a lot of the editing of the videos that I'd done, and then put them together for the website. I
Right.
narrated the text I'd written.
And yeah, it sounds like we work in a very similar way, or I think although a lot of the time when I'm employed, there's a bit more of there's an out performance of some kind that we're working towards. But I think storying best describes what I do in terms of, in the way that you've put it, in terms of meeting a group of people and through whatever are theatrical and podcasty ways, we create a story, whether you're literally making a story or you're listening and talking and responding and creating a thing. And that it's almost like the place is a character, it is a participant, it is more than that.
Yeah.
It's more than a set. It's not like site specific work, because it's more than just a setting, because we're
Yeah,
also responding to this place that we're in.
but the idea of emergence I find really important. Really nice little book that Tim Ingold has written called Making. Published it about 5, 6 years ago now, maybe a few more. But he talks about the difference between um, making and design. Quite simply, I mean, design is a more deterministic approach
Mm.
to wanting to achieve particular outcomes or outputs, as opposed to being able to let something emerge. And that's the thing about storying. It's how the thing gets made. It's not just the
Yeah,
telling. It's allowing the
the
whole
making,
story.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it encompasses the process. And the
exactly.
story is us being here. Um,
You got it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I like that. I think you might have just added a chapter to my PhD
Sorry
thesis.
about that.
I love that.
What What a lovely conversation with David. I thoroughly enjoyed that, Natalie. I had a listen after work and I sat and soaked it all in, and it was really lovely. Do you feel refreshed after these conversations, or do you need to go have a lie down?
Oh, a bit of both. I feel very energized and excited. And I think from the research perspective, my current tricky state is, this is really exciting that other people are coming up, are in similar spaces, and people are referencing things that I know about. And I'm like, whoa, I have read a thing about that. Or what I'm really bad at, as you know, is like having the references to hand. David's really amazing at that, where he can like name every book, every author of every book that he's ever read, it feels like to me, and he can constantly drop like references, and I am like no.
You do a lot of like, I was listening to this podcast and somebody somewhere was saying something about something.
Yeah, I can tell the story, but I don't, the numbers and the names are not at my fingertips. But never mind, that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm not valid.
You're so valid.
So valid. No, it was fantastic to speak to David. Really grateful for his time. If anyone has any other similar kind of projects or people that you think would be good to talk to, and you think, this person also is banging on about this sort of stuff, then please send them my way. Drop us a comment or contact vandalfactory@gmail.com, or go to our social media pages.
It's vandalfactorytheatre@gmail.com.
It is vandalfactorytheatre@gmail.com. Add the theatre in, guys. Come on.
Love you very much. Bye.
Bye.